Yeah, yeah, the economic conditions are like that too, like the growth. The fact that, people will just kind of keep growing and the city will just keep expanding, that assumption is, I mean, it was kind of valid in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Today in the developing countries, it's still valid, although there's unregulated growth is a problem, like slums and everything. There's no slums in the city, as I said in an earlier video. But in the developed countries, growth is not, you can't take it for granted. And then it's in countries like Japan, especially. I think in Germany as well, in parts of Europe, parts of Russia, like growth, you can't take growth for granted. Like you can build all the infrastructure in the world. No one's gonna move in because you just don't have the population. Like the population is just not growing in some of these parts of the world, which is a good thing overall, I think, because I think the world's a little bit overpopulated. But it presents problems for, individual cities if they're kind of losing people. It's not easy to downsize. It's not easy to shrink gracefully because you have a lot of old infrastructure, old buildings that nobody's using anymore, and they're just kind of left behind. Detroit is a city that has shrunk quite a bit, and Detroit is a bit of a mess, to be honest. It's just not easy to shrink. Like, growing is easy. You just kind of plow a piece of land flat and then just build a house on it easy, right? But once people move away, then the house, what do you do with it? It kind of falls down. Yeah, it's not easy. All right, let's go. Let's get back to SimCity and then not too much of real world stuff. All right, so there's power plants. So varying costs, varying amounts of power generated, varying amounts of pollution. So coal is the most polluting, natural gas moderate, oil heavy pollution, solar power plants no pollution, no pollution for nuclear, although there's a possibility of a meltdown. Nuclear, everyone's scared of nuclear because the meltdowns are scary. But I don't know. I feel like the fear is a little bit overblown. I mean, of course you should be scared, right? I mean, if one does melt down, I mean, the radiation is not fun, right? People get cancer and die and all that. But compared to a lot of other bad things that happen in the world, it's not actually that bad. Like people drive cars all the time, but people crash cars all the time and die. Nobody complains that much about it. They still drive, right? Far fewer people die from nuclear meltdowns. In fact, very few people have ever died from nuclear meltdowns. But everybody's scared of nuclear meltdowns. Nobody's scared of, well, some people are scared of driving, but not really. Not very many people. So a bit odd, I think. Like the fear is not entirely rational. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't love nuclear power, but just objectively speaking, you can do a lot worse than nuclear power. I feel like. Anyway, hydrogen power. This is completely fake. I think they mean fusion. Fusion doesn't work yet. They're still working on it. Hydrogen doesn't actually. Like, it doesn't actually generate power. You need power to make hydrogen, or to separate water into hydrogen and oxygen. That consumes power. It doesn't actually create power. So this is good. I don't know what this is about. Hydrogen power plant. The thing about power plants in this game is that they're completely unrealistic. I don't know how much you know about power plants in the real world. So consider this. Like imagine each smokestack is a turbine. So do you know how like coal power works? You burn the coal, heat is generated, you use the heat to boil water, turn water into steam. The steam goes through a turbine, which is like a fan, except it's the other way around. So the steam pushes the turbine, makes it turn, and then that thing goes in a generator, which is a bunch of magnets and wires, and that creates electricity when it turns, right? So you burn coal, you create electricity, but this whole thing, the burning and the turbine and everything, it's like one unit and it runs. And the thing with coal-fired power plants is, well, in fact, the thing with most power plants is that they're efficient at a certain speed. Like there's one optimum mode of functioning. And so if you run them at a certain temperature, at a certain speed, at a certain voltage, and all that, then it's really efficient. If you kind of deviate from that, if you try to slow it down or speed it up, then it very quickly loses efficiency. And if efficiency is basically how much energy you're putting in and how much energy you're putting out. So how much coal you're burning compared to how much electricity you're getting out of it. So once you so the optimum operation is quite there's not much room for error. So if you assume that in this game this is like 8 turbines, so you can turn the whole unit on or off, but you can't really just control one, like you can't kind of fine tune one turbine. One turbine is kind of, it's got a fixed value to it. Am I making sense? Anyway, what I'm trying to say is this slider is completely unrealistic, because what it's saying is by changing the amount of money you put in, you can change the amount of output you get from the power plant, and that this is just a completely smooth gradient for input and output. And that's completely unrealistic, because real power plants you can't do that. Like if you build a coal-fired power plant, you expect to use it at optimum capacity. You can't just turn it on and off like that. Or rather, some power plants you can, like diesel generators, you can kind of turn them on and off quite quickly. Coal you really can't. Nuclear you can't really adjust at all. Like it just runs, right? Let me just look at what power options we have. Solar power plant, you can't even control it because the sun, either you get sun or you get clouds, and so when there's clouds you get less output. Although that there's some technologies you can use to kind of even that out a little bit, but for the most part, solar is highly variable and you can't really control it. Nuclear is highly stable, and you kind of can't control it neither, because once it runs, if you want to stop it, it's really kind of really difficult to stop. And then once you've stopped it, it's kind of really expensive to get it going again. So you just want it to run. I think oil you can switch on and off a lot quicker. Not sure though. I think it depends on what kind of generator it is. But there's peak power, there's base load power, and all that. It's all very complicated. You might want to just look it up on Wikipedia or something. What I'm trying to say is you can't tweak power in the real world the way you can tweak it here, or you can, but the relationship between output and cost is not linear, and it's not simple. Like if you're using peaking power to increase the output, that's really expensive. Whereas if you build baseload, or you build additional baseload generators, it's expensive to build initially, but then to run it's quite cheap. So the economics of it is much more complicated than it is in the game. I don't want to try to explain it completely here. Let's just say it's not. This simulation is not realistic and it's oversimplified. Let's just say that. Also, wind power. Also unrealistic, because wind power really only works where there is wind, whereas in this game, the wind is the same everywhere. The pricing is also not right, although this game is kind of old now, so I guess I'll give it a pass. But you can see like the power generator divided by the monthly cost. That gives you it gives you a value of dollars per megawatt hour, which is, for wind power these days, wind power is kind of more competitive now. Almost, depending on what kind of coal and where it is. If you get a good location, it can be quite competitive. Same with solar. And nuclear is quite expensive in the game, and that's correct. So the emerging technologies like wind and solar is not quite right in this game anymore. But that's because history is, we've changed since the game was made. Alright, so water, we have pipes. I'm assuming water and sewage are combined in this game, because you have water supply, you don't have sewage, or you have sewage, but then it reduces water pollution. It doesn't actually treat the sewage. Like if you have sewage, it doesn't go anywhere. So again, showed a bit of a gap in the simulation. Water pumps, water towers, basically just kind of water supplies, different cost and different volumes. You can pick one or the other depending on how much money you have and how much you want to spend. and how much water you need, and then pipes basically to join them together. Pretty easy stuff. Rubbish is I don't know how accurate this thing is. I mean, you can build a landfill zone, and then the landfill will gradually fill up with rubbish over time. So the more buildings you have, the more rubbish you generate, right? And in this thing, the landfill actually, like, it stores rubbish, but also it slowly removes the rubbish as well, which is, I guess it's as a simulation it works. Not that realistic, because in the real world you kind of just keep piling it up, or you just keep piling up the rubbish until you run out of space, and then you just kind of top it off, and then there's a huge mountain full of rubbish inside. Here, like, the rubbish, it slowly disappears once you put it into the landfill. So depending on how much you're putting in, how big the landfill is, so if you reach equilibrium so that the rubbish going in is the same as the rubbish that's disappearing slowly over time, then you've got a system where the rubbish just disappears eventually. Or you don't have to kind of keep making more landfills. Like in the real world, this thing will just kind of keep growing and growing. The mountain will just keep growing and growing until you have a small hill where the rubbish used to be, and then you close it off and it becomes a hill. And you have to go somewhere else and build a new landfill. And that slowly becomes a mountain as you kind of put more and more rubbish in. Whereas in the game, it doesn't really do that. Is that a problem? I don't think landfills... landfills are local problems. And in some cities, I think in New York, the rubbish dumps are huge. But in the greater scheme of things, they're local problems. They're not really huge global problems. And if they're managed well, then it's kind of okay. We don't, it's a hassle to deal with rubbish, but not easy to avoid. There's also a recycling center reduces city garbage by 20%. Like the 20% figure, I don't know how realistic that is. I guess it depends on the country, it depends on the culture. Like Germany has a really good recycling culture. Other countries, not quite so much. America, not good at all. So it depends on what they do. It's partly it's technology, partly it's culture. What happens is, like, rubbish has a negative value. Imagine if you buy a cup of coffee, you spend, I don't know how expensive coffee is where you are, but you spend money, you buy a cup of coffee. The cup of coffee has positive value. Rubbish has a negative value. You have to pay someone else to take it away from you. Right? And the problem with rubbish is the value. And part of the problem with the negative value of rubbish is that it's all mixed together. So recycling, just the act of separating the rubbish, in the papers, plastics, glass. I think if you've done any sort of recycling, like you kind of have different bins for different products. Like when you do that, you reduce the negative value, and it's in some cases you can convert that into positive value, because it's something like glass and paper. It is actually recyclable. Like you can give it to a recycler, and they can turn it into a valuable product. Like they can turn waste paper into good paper again and sell that for money. And so that paper has positive value. The waste paper has positive value. But only if it's not mixed with other things. When it's mixed with other things, then you have to spend time and money separating the mixed items back into the separate paper and glass and plastic and all that. And so, mixed rubbish has negative value, but separated rubbish, some of it actually has positive value. Some of it has a lot of positive value. Potentially, computers have a lot of positive value. Although computers are still difficult to recycle because they kind of just, metals and plastics all kind of jam together. But yes, it's just like glass and paper and plastic. It actually has positive value depending on how you store them, basically. If you mix them, then no. If you don't mix them, then yes. Anyway, back to this. So reduce city garbage by 20%. That's just I don't know. I guess that number is chosen for gameplay reasons. That, like, how much value the garbage has really depends on whether you have it separated well enough and whether you have the technology to recycle it, basically. And I guess the scale as well. I mean, you have to generate enough rubbish for it to be, or you have to generate enough waste glass for a glass recycling plant to be economically viable. Like if you don't have enough rubbish, you can't run the factory, right? So there's all that stuff to consider. Anyway, this is oversimplified in the game again. Waste to energy plant incinerates garbage to produce power, also produces heavy pollution. That's fairly accurate, I guess. This thing, like depending on how much garbage your city produces, it changes the power output. It's not reliable as a source of power because the amount of rubbish your city generates fluctuates depending on what kind of buildings and how many buildings you have. So it's very difficult to tweak how much power you get out of it. You can't control it neither. You just burn all the rubbish in this game. So you can't say, okay, I want to put half my rubbish in the power plant and half of it in the landfill. You can't do that in this game. So you can't micromanage that. So not reliable as a power source, but fairly useful as a way to get rid of rubbish. Once the monthly cost is $1,000 a month, which is a lot. This thing is $50 per square per month. Oh no, it's $5 per square per month. A lot cheaper than that. So 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. So if you have more than 200 landfill squares, which is 20 by 10, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if your landfill is like that big or something, or like that big, maybe like that big, then you might as well just build the waste incinerator and then forget about the landfill. Pretty much. That's what it means. Although I think this has a maximum capacity though. I don't know if it's... Anyway, that's kind of rubbish. Alright, so next up we have the civic buildings. Police, fire, schools, hospitals. I mean, these are fairly familiar, I think, to everyone. The city provides those. I don't know what your political leanings are, or if you have any opinions at all, or what your understanding of economics and externalities and all that is. Usually the city or the government runs these things because they are most efficient when it's a public good. Let's say wow, there's a lot of different police stations. I mean, okay, let's say a fire station, for example. The thing about fire stations is they're most effective if everybody pays for it and they protect everybody. Because what happens is, imagine if there's a private firefighter company, right? And then you subscribe to the service, right? So imagine you pay for these guys and they say, okay, if you have a fire at your house, we'll put it out. Your neighbor does not subscribe. And so if they have a fire at their house, the firefighter will not put it out. You might think, okay, that's fair enough. You pay for the service, you get the service, right? But what happens is, if your neighbor's house is caught on fire, they can't put it out. They haven't paid for the service to be put out. So their house just burns. The problem with fire is, the fire is not going to respect the property boundary. The fire is going to keep burning and it's going to spread. And then, if it just kind of burns out of control, very quickly your house is going to set on fire. But then, okay, your house is set on fire, then the firefighters come along and put out the fire at your house. But then they say, okay, the house next door has not paid, so we're not putting that house. So what happens is, if the firefighters had put out the fire at your neighbor's house in the first place, your house wouldn't be burned. But because they didn't, then the fire got out of control and your house got burnt. So you see the problem there. If you have a subscriber service for firefighters, you get a lot of unnecessary damage to your city because the people who don't pay end up, the result of it is that it damages a lot more than if everybody pays and everybody's covered. You see how that works? It's the same with crime. Like, let's say, okay, if your house gets robbed, the police comes and tries to solve the crime, right? But your neighbor is not subscribed to the police service, so their house gets robbed. and the police doesn't do anything about it. Okay, then so what happens if your neighbor then becomes like a den of thieves? So all the criminals hang out at your neighbor's house, and they're right next to you, and so they cause a lot of trouble for you. Every time one of them comes to your house, they get arrested. Okay, that's fine. But then the den's right there. It's right next door. The police don't do anything about next door because they're not subscribed to the police service, but they're the thieves. So then they cause trouble for you constantly. Whereas the most efficient way, if the police just catch them all next door, right? But the next door haven't paid for it, so they don't catch it. So you see how if it's a private subscriber service for police, then you have a lot of unnecessary crime. You see what I'm saying? Whereas it's a lot more efficient if everybody pays for the police and everybody's covered. There's similar things with hospitals, similar things with schools. Like if some people get education and some people don't, then the people who don't get education becomes a problem for those who do, because they can't get good jobs, they're not educated, they're not as productive in society and all that. And the same with health. Like if you can afford a doctor, your neighbor can't, and then your neighbor they get sick, they can't work, but they can't afford healthcare, and so they just stay sick and they can never work. Whereas it's a lot cheaper for everyone if they can just see a doctor, get better, and then get back to work, and then be productive again, and then they can contribute to the economy again, right? And so these are the sort of things where it's actually more effective if the government takes care of it than if private businesses take care of it. And unlike if you say luxury cars, why doesn't the government build luxury cars? Because there's no point. Like private companies do that better. Private companies do not do firefighting and police better, because like the end result is not as good as if the government did those things. So it's not simple, right? I've kind of gone on a huge tangent again. So in SimCity, you are responsible for police, firefighters, schools, and hospitals, and each of these, they have kind of a coverage area. I don't know how realistic that is. I don't think that's very realistic, to be honest. Because if police have police cars, conceivably they can travel across the entire city. There's no reason why they have to be limited at a circle. I mean, if there's only one policeman, then obviously there's a limited amount of work he can do. Like if there's two criminals, he can only catch one, right? But in the game, there's coverage. Like if you have a large, that's a jail. Like if you have a large police station, then you can cover the entire city with one building. Whereas if you have a smaller one, you can cover less. Oh wait, that's the same building, isn't it? I really think this is not realistic. The problem with this in the simulation is, like, it forces most of your buildings into this circle. Or in order to optimize the efficiency of your simulated city, you'd build stuff inside the circle. And this is like I do this with schools all the time. So schools and clinics affect residential areas. So my optimized build is I'll put down a school and put down a clinic. You see how the circles there, they're almost the same, they overlap a little bit. So then I build all my houses within the circle. So then these two buildings will serve all the houses. And that's efficient, because if I put a few houses here and then put a few houses here, then I need two schools. I have one there covering that one. This one doesn't cover these houses, then I have to build a second one here. So that's not efficient. Whereas if I fit both of these in the area of the same school, then I only have to build one school, and that's cheaper. It's more efficient in the game, not in the real world as much, but in the game it's more efficient. So this is one of the areas where the limitations of the simulation is very, very apparent in the way I play usually. Yeah, like the circles. I really disagree with the circles. Like I know, like, simulations are hard. Like it's difficult to. I mean, there's a lot of numbers going on in the game engine, so I don't blame it too much. But I would like it if people just travel to school. And I mean, if they're further away, then maybe they don't get as good of an education because they, maybe they miss school because they can't get to school if they're too far away. But if they can get to school, then even if it's outside the circle, if the travel times are good enough, they should get to school, and then they should fill up until they kind of reach the student capacity, and if they go over, then the school grade decreases. I don't think the circle is. I don't think it's good for the game, to be honest. I mean, you can make it so that it degrades the quality of the education if they're too far away. That would make sense. Like if the circle represents an optimum education, so within the circle you get optimum, and then outside the circle the service kind of gradually decays and then gets less efficient. Maybe that would make more sense, because you have traveled too far, then you miss school sometimes, you can't get to school. It would make sense. It would make more sense than the effect of the school kind of being limited to the circle only, I think. Anyway, so that's how these things work in the game. Although in education, that's actually more like this prisons to hold criminals. I don't know what it means. Like you can catch criminals. I guess it reduces crime if you don't release the prisoners immediately. There's the fire department landing strip. Provides widespread fire coverage, but it takes a lot of room. Look at that. It's a landing strip, so there's kind of planes to fight fires. That's amazing. In the schools, so the different types of buildings affects different age groups. So elementary schools, obviously, elementary school age, and the library is for adults to maintain the education levels. The simulation for the education is you kind of go to school, your EQ, I think they call it. It increases. Education quotient, I think that is. And then once you leave school, it starts to decline because you forget things apparently in this game. But then the library will maintain that, so the decline will be decreased. High school is for teenagers, and then museums is for. Actually, I don't know what that does. I don't know if the museum actually maintains education level, or if it only reduces or it only kind of expands the demand cap or not. I should check on that. So the college and the university don't have a circle. You see that there's no circle. So for the college, it works citywide. So there's no kind of distance limit at all, which is kind of good. I can see how that's unrealistic for elementary schools, but I still think the circle is also unrealistic, and I don't really know what to do about that, to be honest. There's private schools, up to 2 private schools. You don't have to pay for these, but only rich people get to go to them. They're kind of useful actually to reduce the amount of pressure on your schools. But again, like education. Oh, there's 3 private schools. Like, sometimes rich people will. I mean, since they go to private schools and they use private healthcare anyway, then they would prefer if the government stops paying so much money, for public schools and public healthcare. It's actually, I mean, it's kind of short-sighted, because I mean, if you're a rich person, you own a business, it doesn't actually help you if all the people you're trying to hire don't have a good education, right? It doesn't actually help you if they're all poor and hungry and resort to crime because they're starving. It doesn't really help you if the people you're trying to hire are sick and can't afford to see the doctor, right? It's actually not good for you, not good for your business, if that happens. So even if you go to a private school and you have private healthcare, if you're a rich person and you want to run a business, I mean, in the long run, it's better if the government actually does these things well, and they have enough money to do it. But I guess in the short term, some people are just greedy. Universities, major art museums. This is definitely a demand cap buster. And main libraries as well. A lot of education buildings, actually. Hospitals, not so much. Disease Research Center extends your Sim's life. So again, it simulates the. Actually, I won't talk about those yet. Maybe I should talk about that in the next video. Because there's a lot of numbers going on in this game. Yeah, maybe I should do that. So medical centers, again, it improves your healthcare. Landmarks, I think all of these are just demand cap busters. I don't know if they provide any employment. Maybe they do. But they definitely increase your demand cap. And the demand cap basically, I don't know if I explained this very well. Like, there's an invisible hard limit on the number of each type of building you can have. So residential, commercial, industrial. And there's like, well, it's not a hard limit, but there's a cap. There's a fixed number, basically. And only if, or once you build up to that limit, your city just won't grow anymore, no matter how much infrastructure you provide, unless you do the demand cap busters. So one of these things, and then or a park. These parks also work. What are they called? Build parks, yeah. So parks also work. Landmarks work. And so these things increase the cap, and so then your city can build more buildings until it reaches the new cap. And so for your city to continue to grow, you kind of have to put these things in eventually. These things are quite expensive though, so you put in the parks first. They don't do quite as much. And if you look on the internet, you'll find the demand cap buster list, and you can see all the numbers. So all the numbers exist in the game. It just doesn't tell you what they are. When you play, they're hidden from you basically. They also look pretty cool. I mean, look at these things, badass. Big Ben, Jefferson Memorial, awesome. Look pretty good as well. What are these? Rewards and business deals. So these are kind of like achievements in game. As your city grows and you meet certain requirements, you can build some of this stuff. Also kind of cool. Like some of these are to help you if you're running out of money. Some other ones actually cost you money, but they're demand cap busters, and then they do various things. I think all of these are demand cap busters in some way. So you kind of have to have some of this stuff to grow eventually. Should I go through all of these? Courthouses, city halls. I think it's gonna take too long if I try to discuss every single one of these buildings and what they do in real life. Yeah, it's gonna take too long. All right, let's not go into too much detail. Well, actually, that pretty much sums up the different parts of the city in game, and I kind of talked about real life as well. Alright, I'll stop there. I won't talk too much. I might have to split that into 2 videos as well. Alright, what should we do? Should we keep talking about abstract things, or should we start building a city? Because, there's a lot of graphs. Maybe I'll talk about all these graphs, all the data views. I need a city to work on though. Maybe I'll talk about all of that in the next video. And spreadsheets, more spreadsheets. The city's just, this game is all spreadsheets. Yeah, okay, those things in the next video, and then we'll get into a real city, I think. Okay,